Hello YouTube! In this video we're going to look at knowledge. In particular, we're going to look at epistemic minimalism, which is the thesis that knowledge is mere true belief. This position has been defended most notably by Sartwell, and we'll go through some of the arguments for it and some of its problems. Before getting into that though, just a quick advert. If you like my channel, you can support me on Patreon or with a one-off donation on PayPal. I offer private tutoring, please email if you're interested in that. And if you want to talk about any of this stuff, you can join the Discord, the link will be in the description. Okay then, well with that out of the way, let's start with a bit of the background. So, one of the central questions in epistemology concerns the analysis of knowledge. The question is, what is knowledge? And our goal is to give the necessary and sufficient conditions for knowledge. So we basically want to give a definition of knowledge that rules out all of the cases of beliefs that are not knowledge and includes all beliefs that are knowledge. So yeah, we want to know what exactly is knowledge. Now, the traditional analysis of knowledge is that knowledge is justified true belief. So on this view, there are three conditions that must be met to have knowledge. We say that S knows that P if and only if S believes that P is true, and S's belief that P is justified. So Verity knows that the Earth is a globe. This means that Verity believes the Earth is a globe, it is true that the Earth is a globe, and Verity has justification for her belief that the Earth is a globe. The first two conditions here are fairly uncontroversial. So when we say belief here, we're using that in a broad sense to mean something like accepting a proposition to be true. I can only know a proposition if I believe it. So like, if Sydney is a flat earther, it wouldn't make sense to say that he knows the Earth is a globe. Similarly, surely we can only know things that are true, right? Since it's not true that the Earth is flat, Sydney can't know that the Earth is flat. So what about the justification condition? Well, the idea here is that knowledge isn't simply it can't simply be a matter of a lucky guess. So let's say I believe that it will rain tomorrow, and indeed it is true that it will rain tomorrow, but I formed that belief simply on the basis of flipping a coin. The vast majority of epistemologists think that's not enough to know that it will rain tomorrow, because I just got lucky. In order to know something, in order to know that P, I need to have good reasons for my belief that P. I need to have justification for my belief that P. Okay, so there have been a number of challenges to this analysis of knowledge, a number of challenges to JTB. Most famously, the most famous challenge comes from Gettier cases. Now, I have another video outlining Gettier cases, which I will link in the comments. But the basic structure of a Gettier case is that a situation is described where a person has a justified true belief in some proposition, but it seems that they do not know the proposition. For example, suppose I wake up in the morning, I look at my clock, and it says 8 o'clock. And then I form the belief that it is 8 a.m. I mean, it seems I'm justified in doing so, right? The reading on my clock plus my understanding that it is morning provides a good reason to believe that it is 8 a.m. Moreover, it is true that it is 8 a.m. However, unbeknownst to me, my clock actually stopped at 8 p.m. the previous night. So, in this situation, I have a justified true belief that it's 8 a.m. in the morning, but the general consensus is I don't know that it's 8 a.m. I don't have knowledge, right? So I have a justified true belief, but it's not knowledge. So then epistemologists will ask, well, what more is required beyond justified true belief in order for a belief to count as knowledge? So the general assumption here is that knowledge is more than mere true belief. True belief is necessary for knowledge, but more is required. On the traditional analysis, knowledge is justified true belief. Now, Gettier cases challenge that. Maybe we need more than just justification, or we need something other than justification. But we need more than just true belief, right? Like, that's pretty much everybody agrees with that. This assumption, however, has been challenged. And it's challenged by Sartwell in his article, Knowledge is Merely True Belief. And so in this video we're going to outline Sartwell's arguments and consider some challenges to them. So, Sartwell claims that knowledge is mere true belief. So S knows that P if and only if, number one, S believes that P, and number two, P is true. That's it. No justification is required. Indeed, nothing more is required. All that matters for knowledge is that you have a true belief. That's it. It makes no difference how you acquired the belief. So this is epistemic minimalism. All right. Well, that's the claim, right? That's the theory. Why should we believe this? Well, Sartwell gives, I guess, broadly speaking, two arguments. First of all, he gives a series of cases where we are inclined to attribute knowledge, supposedly, but where no justification is present. We'll call these Sartwell cases. So in Sartwell cases, a person has mere true belief without justification, but intuitively they do have knowledge. So here are some of these cases. First of all, there is the flash of insight case. Suppose that Verity is a mathematician working on a hard maths problem. She's been struggling for days to find the solution to it. One morning she wakes up and has a flash of insight where she kind of just sees what the solution is. Now, she doesn't know the complete proof, right? But she kind of has this sense that she sees the solution. She doesn't have the proof for the solution, but she feels like she has this insight into the solution. So the claim is that, moreover, it just so happens that she is right? Although she doesn't have the proof for the solution, there is a proof for the solution, and the solution is the correct solution. So the claim is Verity knows the solution. In this case, Sartwell thinks we would be inclined to say that yes, Verity knows the solution, even though she has no justification for believing it to be the solution, because she hasn't worked out the proof yet. So a flash of insight, that's not justification, but that's enough for knowledge. Okay, another case is the religious faith case. Suppose that Sidney believes in God. Sidney recognises that there's no compelling evidence for God, so he has to take a leap of faith to believe in God. As it happens, God does exist. Sidney is right. Sartwell thinks that in this case we would say that Sidney knows that God exists. Or suppose we all die and go to heaven. Well, as an atheist, I'm going to be quite surprised about this, but I might well say, when I get to heaven, I might well say something like, hey, it turns out Sidney knew it all along. The theists, they knew it all along. So in this case, we're attributing knowledge to Sidney, even though he has no justification. Again, maybe you might think that theism has justification. That if you think there are convincing arguments for theism, that's fine. But the point is that Sidney does not. Let's say Sidney just doesn't know any of these arguments, or he doesn't think they work, or whatever. So he thinks there's just no compelling evidence for God. So he's taking a leap of faith. Even so, Sartwell thinks we would attribute knowledge to Sidney, if indeed God does exist. Another case is the case of mundane faith. So David's son has been accused of murder. The evidence against his son is very strong, but David refuses to believe that his son would do such a thing. He has faith that his son is innocent. And as it happens, his son is indeed innocent. Well, in this case, it would be natural to say that David knows his son is innocent. Again, when the evidence comes out and when his son is exonerated, it would be natural to say David knew it all along. Actually, with the case of mundane faith, notice that the justification, if anything, tells against David's belief. There are good reasons not to believe that the son is innocent, yet David still has knowledge that his son is innocent, because he has a true belief that his son is innocent. Another case, another kind of Sartwell case, comes from Colin Radford. So this is the quiz case. Suppose that Delia is taking a quiz on music history, and one of the questions is, who composed 433? Well, Delia just doesn't know. She's stumped, right? So initially she doesn't know. She has no idea. And she maybe isn't particularly interested in this kind of music, so she really feels like she has no idea. But then the answer John Cage pops into her head, and that's what she writes down, right? She has no idea who John Cage is. She has no idea where she heard that name. She, doesn't even know what 433 is. But this name, John Cage, it just, comes from the ether, pops into her head, and she's like, okay, I'm going to go with that. If you ask her why she thinks it's John Cage, she wouldn't be able to say anything. She just sort of has this feeling that it's John Cage. As it happens, Delia is right. John Cage was indeed the composer of 433. And Sartwell would claim that in this case it's perfectly natural to say Delia knows that the composer of 433 is John Cage. I should note, just in brackets, as it were, so Radford's example was originally used to target the belief condition. Radford originally gave this example so he originally suggested that in this case Delia does not have the belief that the answer is John Cage, but she still knows the answer. But we can just sort of modify Radford's example. We can say, well, suppose that Delia actually does form the belief that the answer is John Cage. She doesn't have any justification for this, but she forms this belief, and then we have a case of true belief without justification, where supposedly we would be willing to say Delia knows, she has knowledge that 433 was composed by John Cage. Okay, so what all of these cases demonstrate is that knowledge can be based on all sorts of sources beyond justification. Knowledge can be based on mere intuition in the colloquial sense. I might say that a particular belief just feels right to me. Knowledge can be based on faith, taking a leap beyond the evidence. It can be based on just a lucky guess, a stab in the dark. In these cases, people have knowledge merely on the basis of their true beliefs. So, as Sartwell says, and I quote, "Problems are solved in a variety of ways, ranging from the reliable and rational to the perfectly inexplicable. We should not falsify our own intellectual lives in a philosophical reconstruction of how these lives are conducted by pretending that knowledge always proceeds along the orderly path of justification." So, Now, even if Sartwell is right about these cases, this does leave us with a question. Why do we care so much about justification? Why has it seemed to so many philosophers that justification is necessary for knowledge? As I mentioned, like at the beginning, right, there is this very very widespread consensus that, knowledge can't be just a lucky guess or something like that. Knowledge can't be based on just taking a leap of faith. You need to have justification. You need to have good reasons. Why is this, if indeed justification is not necessary for knowledge? Well, Sartwell accepts that justification is important. But the reason why it's important, he says, is that it's a reliable criterion for knowledge, or it's a reliable indicator for knowledge. In much the same way that the pH paper turning red is a reliable indicator of a substance being acidic. So turning the pH paper red is not it's not constitutive of what it is to be an acid. An acid is a molecule that is either capable of donating a proton or is capable of forming a covalent bond with an electron pair. That's what an acid actually is. Now, if we put a substance on some pH paper and the pH paper turns red, that's a reliable indicator that it's an acid. But it doesn't make it an acid, right? I mean, in principle, the paper might turn red for some other reason. Or something might be an acid, but then, for some reason, the paper fails to turn red. That's possible. So turning the pH paper red, that's an indicator of acidity. Similarly, Sartwell says, when you have justification, this is an indication that you have knowledge, or that you have true belief. If somebody claims to know that P, or to have a true belief that P, we will be inclined to ask them for justification. We will ask them, okay, how do you know that? Right? Why do you believe that? And if they can't provide a justification, we will be entitled not to accept their claim that their belief is true. Right? I mean, obviously, if you want to convince me that a belief is true, then you're going to have to give me justification. Mere guesses are not usually correct, and that's obviously what makes lucky guesses lucky. So like this is one reason why justification is important, right? Like in order for me to form a belief, in order for me to think a proposition is true, I'm going to have to be presented with some sort of reason or justification in order to take that step and hold that belief. Moreover, by displaying the reasons that led you to form your beliefs, we can judge whether you are likely to be appropriately hooked up to reality. So if we know that somebody forms beliefs without justification, we can know that this person is no longer to be trusted. She's not a reliable informant. We don't have to trust her testimony anymore. And so this is why we care about justification. Justification is important, but what really matters is not the means by which we achieve true belief. It's just true belief itself. Justification is part of the means by which we achieve true belief, but true belief is what really matters, at least as Sartwell sees it. And the Sartwell cases are supposed to demonstrate that. So, okay, those were some cases which challenge the idea that justification is necessary for knowledge. What might we say about these cases? Can the sort of traditional view resist Sartwell cases? Well, yes, there are many objections here. So one general issue with Sartwell's appeal to these cases is that none of these cases seem to be clear-cut in the way that, for instance, many Gettier cases seem to be. I mean, there's almost universal agreement among epistemologists that in Gettier cases, subjects seem to have a justified true belief, but not knowledge. And epistemologists will also usually claim that even laypersons share this intuition. So when Gettier cases like the stopped clock case are presented to undergraduates, most of the class just immediately agrees that the subject has justified true belief, but not knowledge. Now, I mean, I don't know, this may not be true, right? But that's the claim, right? The claim is that in Gettier cases, there's basically universal agreement that we have justified true belief, but not knowledge. In Sartwell cases, by contrast, well, these are just far less compelling. So, I mean, yeah, maybe it's natural to say of Delia that she knows that John Cage is the composer of 433, but are we sure that we're using the word knows in its standard sense here? I mean, so one worry is just, it also seems kind of natural to just deny that Delia knows this. Like, okay, Delia is basically taking a guess, and so she doesn't actually know that 433 was composed by John Cage. She took a lucky guess, and that's all. It wasn't knowledge, even though she had a true belief. So the objection here is that when we are testing philosophical analyses, we should appeal to clear-cut cases, where there is broad agreement on the intuitions that the cases are supposed to elicit. But all of these Sartwell cases are disputed. They're likely to elicit competing intuitions. So we shouldn't be appealing to cases like this in defending an analysis of knowledge. So to be clear, for the Sartwell cases to work, for them to support epistemic minimalism, two things have to be true of them. It has to be the case, first of all, that subjects in Sartwell cases do not have justification, and second, that subjects in Sartwell cases do have knowledge. Both of these claims are disputed. So Scott Aiken, in his article, Knowledge is Justified True Belief, provides an alternative view of these cases. So take the flash of insight case. Aiken grants that in this case, Verity does know the answer, but he says that in fact, Verity also has a justification for her belief. After all, Verity is a mathematician who has thought through similar problems before. Verity has expertise in this area. Moreover, she will know that she has expertise in this area. She will remember thinking through similar problems before. So the point is that she actually has reason to trust her flash of insight. So this is just something that happens with like expert mathematicians when they work on mathematics problems. Sometimes they kind of get these intuitions and they can get a sense of when these intuitions are trustworthy. In general, beliefs based on intuitions can sometimes be justified. So this point is, I suppose, particularly clear if we think about like the many different views of justification available. So take, for instance, externalist views of justification. According to externalists, S's belief that P can be justified even if S cannot cite any reasons in favour of the belief. For instance, a simple form of externalism is reliabilism, which says that a belief that P is justified just in case P is the output of a reliable belief-forming process. You don't need to know anything about how this process works in order for beliefs formed by that process to be justified. All that matters is that the process is reliable, right? All that matters is that there's some belief-forming process which tends to produce true beliefs. As long as you've got that, like the kind of mechanism by which this process works could be completely hidden to you. That doesn't matter. So since Verity is in fact an expert at mathematics, her mathematical intuitions tend to be reliable, so her flash of insight is justified, according to Aiken. Similar points might be made for the other cases. So take the mundane faith case. Sartwell says that David has no justification for trusting his son, but, I mean, really? Presumably, David will have had a great deal of experience interacting with his son, right? I mean, like, it's presumably the case that David has had a lot of personal interactions with his son, and that's part of why he trusts him so much. So David has had experience of his son's character. Given that David knows his son so well, I mean, why isn't that just sufficient justification for him to trust his son? David has access to a great deal of information that is just not available to outsiders, that is not available to police and prosecutors, right? Because the police and prosecutors have not spent a lifetime interacting with this person. So the claim might be, okay, David does know that his son is innocent, but he has justification for this, so it's not really a Sartwell case. And then, of course, we can sort of take the sort of opposite view of these sorts of cases. So suppose we say that justification is not present in these cases. Well, then we might just insist that these cases are actually not cases of knowledge. And Aiken points out we can appeal to pragmatics to explain why we might nevertheless sometimes say that subjects in these cases know things. So let's take David's case again. Suppose we say that David's belief is unjustified. He doesn't really know that his son is innocent. The evidence against his son is so strong that actually it just isn't. He doesn't have good reason for trusting his son in the face of this evidence. So, okay, what Aiken would want to say is David doesn't really know that his son is innocent. But as Aiken puts it, we might nevertheless let David get away with saying that he knows his son is innocent. And the reason for this is that in many contexts, all that really matters to us is the truth of a belief. All that really matters in David's case is whether or not the son is actually innocent. So if David believes that his son is innocent, and it turns out that his son is indeed innocent, we won't correct David when he says that he knew it all along. After all, David has probably been through a pretty miserable time with his son being accused of this terrible crime. That's probably been the source of a great deal of stress. So when David says that he knew all along that his son was innocent, well, we can let him have that one, right? It would be pedantic, it would be tactless to correct him. So basically, when we sometimes don't mind when people say false things. We'll sometimes let it go when people say false things. Think about how somebody might say after a loved one has died that the loved one is looking down on them. Even a person who doesn't believe in an afterlife might sometimes say something like this. So, I don't believe that anybody goes to heaven. I don't believe that dead loved ones are looking down on us. But I'm not going to bother correcting somebody who does say this. In general, there are just so many things that matter beyond truth and beyond getting things exactly right. We want to maintain goodwill. We want to maintain friendships. We want to be kind to other people. We don't want to be pedantic and tactless. So there are situations where once we've established a belief is true, it's just irrelevant whether a person really knew it. And that's why we might be willing to say in David's case that, yeah, okay, he always knew his son was innocent. That's not strictly speaking true, but, we're not speaking strictly. But then, we can just modify the case a little bit so that it actually kind of does matter. whether or not people have justification. So suppose instead that David was a member of a jury and it was not his son whose innocence was in question, but just a defendant's innocence, a person who David doesn't know. And suppose again that the evidence against the defendant is very strong. Okay, so David just has faith that this person is innocent against the very strong evidence. Now, if it turns out, like, I don't know, further evidence gets revealed that the defendant is innocent, maybe we'll be glad that David insisted on his innocence. But in this context, we'll probably want to know, like, why does David believe the defendant is innocent? What reasons does he have? If all he can say is that he merely had faith in the defendant, well, that just seems totally irresponsible. Like, okay, yeah, David, you managed to get it right this time, but as a member of the jury, you should have had better judgment. That's kind of, you can imagine people responding like that. So in that case, we'll say, like, if David says, I knew it all along, we'd probably say, like, no, you didn't. Like, no, you just took you were just lucky, you had faith in the defendant, but basically you just took a lucky guess. You didn't know it all along. So the key point here is that these Sartwell cases seem very much open to interpretation. So, the argument would be, well, they're just not going to provide like a strong enough reason to overturn a theory that has been found very plausible by almost everybody, right? Like these Sartwell cases, it's not clear that subjects in the Sartwell cases have knowledge. It's not clear that they do not have justification. So that's the objection. Okay, then with that said, then let's turn to Sartwell's second argument, which I guess we can call the argument from inquiry. Now, there are a couple of different ways of stating this argument, so let's start with the simplest form. So the argument goes like this: inquiry has a goal, and that goal is knowledge. So when we inquire into something, we're aiming to achieve something, right? We're not just, like, there are certain rules for inquiry, and we're not just following those rules for the sake of it. Like when we engage in inquiry, we're not just playing a game, following rules for the sake of it, regardless of their payoff. We expect that we're going to achieve something from an inquiry, and that achievement is knowledge. That's what we want out of inquiry. More precisely, knowledge is the goal of inquiry with respect to particular propositions. When I inquire into some proposition P, I want to know whether or not P is the case. So I want either knowledge that P or knowledge that not P, whatever may be true, right? Like whichever may be the case. So basically I want to know whether or not P is the case. There are, of course, other goals that we might have concerning inquiry. So, rationality or wisdom. These goals are not to do with particular propositions, but rather with sets of beliefs and relations between beliefs. It would make no sense to speak of rationality that P or wisdom that P in the way that we speak of knowledge that P. So the claim then is that the goal of inquiry, when we're inquiring into a particular proposition, the aim is to have knowledge, to know whether or not that proposition is true. So let's take some specific proposition. Let's say the proposition, there is intelligent life on other worlds. We then ask, is this true? Right? Is it true that there is intelligent life on other worlds? Well, this has started us off on an inquiry. And so we investigate. We investigate the question, and now once we take ourselves to have knowledge one way or the other, inquiry into this proposition ends. If we discover convincing evidence of radio broadcasts from another star, then we'll say, okay, we know there is intelligent life on another world, and that terminates inquiry into this particular proposition. Of course, we may continue inquiring into other propositions. We can ask further questions. We can ask, okay, once we've discovered intelligent life on another world, we can ask, what is their civilization like? Can we translate their language? Etc., etc. But no further inquiry is needed into the proposition, there is intelligent life on other worlds. We have established that we know it. And so inquiry there ends. But notice that what terminates the inquiry here is simply that we take it that this proposition is true. So once we take ourselves to have a true belief in a proposition, inquiry into that proposition ends. Now, of course, in practice, we will also take it that we have justification for believing the proposition, but this justification is simply what, it's just what indicates the truth of the proposition. What terminates the inquiry is simply that we are confident that we have achieved a true belief. So this is the simple argument for epistemic minimalism. Premise 1, knowledge is the goal of inquiry. Premise 2, the goal of inquiry is true belief. So conclusion, knowledge is true belief. Sartwell gives a somewhat more elaborate argument along similar lines. So first of all, he argues that on any plausible theory of what justification is, justification must be understood in terms of truth conducivity. So that is to say, what's significant about justification, the reason why justification matters, is that when you have justification for your beliefs, this tends to conduce to true beliefs. It would be very odd, I mean, it would perhaps even be conceptually incoherent to say that we have a means of justification, so we have some method that provides justification for our beliefs, but that method leads to false beliefs, right? Because, I mean, if we can show that a particular method leads to false beliefs, then it seems like we've just shown that it's not a form of justification. So suppose that Verity forms beliefs by consulting a crystal ball, and then she says, yeah, I know that most of the beliefs formed by reading the crystal ball are false, but nevertheless, the crystal ball justifies my beliefs. Well, that just seems totally absurd. By contrast, all we need to do to show that a method provides justification is show that it leads to true beliefs, right? Like if I can show that a particular method tends to produce true beliefs, well, that's it. That's all I need to do to show that it provides justification. So the thought is that on any plausible theory of justification, there's a very tight connection between justification and truth. Under normal circumstances, the beliefs that have justification are more likely to be true than those that do not. Justification is what gives us reason to think that something is true. So as Sartwell puts it, he says, we cannot even specify what it is to have adequate grounds, so that is, what it is to have justification, except that these grounds tend to establish that the proposition in question is true. We cannot even specify what it is to be in a strong position, except as being in a strong position to get the truth. So there are many theories of justification, but they all forge this connection between justification and truth. An externalist might say a belief is justified if it's the output of a reliable method of belief formation, which means, a method of belief formation that tends to produce true beliefs. Or an internalist might say that a belief is justified only if the person holding the belief can cite good reasons for the belief, a good reason being a reason to think the belief is true, right? So justification is what gets us to the truth. Now, when we engage in inquiry, of course, we want to form justified beliefs. Inquiry involves asking ourselves, which of these beliefs can be justified. But the reason why we want justification is because it tends to get us to the truth. If justification didn't have this connection to the truth, there would be no point in it. The point of presenting a justification for a belief is precisely to show that that belief is true. Now, we have to distinguish between a goal and the means of achieving the goal. So when playing chess, the goal is to checkmate the opponent's king. Capturing the opponent's pawns might be part of the means of achieving that goal, but it's not constitutive of the goal. The goal is to get the king in checkmate. So there's a difference between something that's constitutive of a goal and something that's a mere means of achieving a goal. Indeed, Sartwell says that it would be incoherent to build into the definition of a goal something which is the mere means of achieving the goal. And with all that said, we can give the following argument. So premise 1, knowledge is the goal of inquiry. Premise 2, justification is merely a means to achieving the goal of inquiry. Premise 3, it is incoherent to build into the definition of the goal of inquiry anything that is merely a means to satisfying the goal. So premise 4, it is incoherent to build justification into the definition of knowledge. So, conclusion, justification is not constitutive of knowledge. Now, of course, this doesn't actually in itself establish epistemic minimalism. It doesn't establish that true belief alone is knowledge, because it could be that there are additional factors that are constitutive of knowledge beyond both true belief and justification. But insofar as this kind of removes justification from the playing field, this is going to lend support to epistemic minimalism, right? We don't need justification to have knowledge. So knowledge is the goal of inquiry, justification is the means to achieving the goal. What exactly is the goal of inquiry? Well, it can't be justified true belief, because justification is the means of achieving the goal, right? So Sartwell says, inquiry is like a journey, and true belief is its destination. Justification is a map. Using the map will help us arrive at our destination, but the point is to arrive. Okay, well, what might we say in response to this argument? So one obvious question here concerns the third premise. So why can't a means to achieving a goal be constitutive of the goal? Jonathan Kavanvig, or Van Vig, I'm not actually sure how his name is pronounced, he gives the example of the goal of earning £1 million. Earning 100. I have dollars written on the screen, don't I? Okay, we'll go with dollars then. So Jonathan, he gives the example of the goal of earning $1 million. Now, earning $100 is both a means to achieving the goal of earning $1 million, but it's also a constituent of it. So it seems that part of what it is to earn $1 million is just to earn $100 over and over and over and over. So there's nothing incoherent in the idea that a means to achieving a goal might be constitutive of the goal. I mean, we might resist this example though, because we might say, well, wait a minute, there are many ways of earning $1 million. You might do it through winning the lottery, you might do it through inheritance. In these cases, you get the 1 million in one fell swoop. So you don't need to earn $100 at any point in order to earn that million. Earning $100 is not required. Earning $100 over and over again is not required to earn $1 million. That's just one way to do it. Similarly, Sartwell might say that justification is not required for knowledge. It's just one way to gain knowledge. Moreover, as David Sacris and James Beebe point out in their article, Is Justification Necessary for Knowledge? We might wonder whether the goal of acquiring knowledge is really like the goal of acquiring $1 million. In the case of acquiring $1 million, one way to achieve the goal is just to accumulate the means. So earning $100, that's part of the means by which you would earn $1 million. If you accumulate that means enough, then you'll get to $1 million eventually. And that's why it makes sense to say, in this case, that the means can be constitutive of the goal. But knowledge doesn't seem to be like this, because merely accumulating the means to knowledge, that is, merely accumulating greater and greater justification for a belief, that's never going to give you knowledge. It's never going to be sufficient to give you knowledge, even on the traditional view, because the belief also has to be true, right? You can have as much justification as you want. If it's a false belief, it's not knowledge. But we might put pressure on premise 3 and say that actually it's not incoherent to build into the definition of the goal of inquiry anything that is merely a means to satisfying that goal. Okay, a second concern about Sartwell's argument is that it assumes that justification is of merely instrumental value. This is expressed in the second premise. So the second premise says that justification is merely a means to achieving the goal of inquiry. So justification is not valuable in itself. It's not intrinsically valuable. It's only valuable as a means to some further end. This is unlike knowledge, which is the final goal of inquiry. So knowledge is something we take to be valuable just in itself. But this can be resisted. I mean, why not say that justification is valuable just for its own sake? It seems at least possible that a person might want justified beliefs for no other reason than that they value justification. So, why couldn't justification be a final goal of inquiry? Well, Sartwell does anticipate this point. So he says, okay, suppose we say that justification is intrinsically valuable. So suppose we say knowledge is the goal of inquiry, and then this goal of knowledge decomposes into two further goals, justification and truth. So knowledge involves achieving two different goals that may come apart, right? So to have knowledge you must believe the truth, and you must believe with justification. You must have justification for the belief. But there are situations where justification and truth are in tension. We've already seen this with the Sartwell cases. If the people in Sartwell cases insisted on having justification, they would fail to believe true things. So there are cases of true belief without justification, where insisting on justification would lose the true belief. By contrast, there are also plenty of cases of people who have had justification for false beliefs. Scientists in the 1800s had plenty of justification for believing Newtonian mechanics. You know, it had developed a variety of novel predictions, it had great explanatory power and scope, it was based on a few simple laws, it was the most powerful empirical theory to have been developed up to that time, but it turned out to be false. It was later refuted and replaced with general relativity. So since the goals of justification and truth are sometimes in tension with each other, and if we were to say that knowledge has the goals of justification and truth, well, Sartwell says this would make knowledge an incoherent notion. Knowledge would give us two different goals that cannot always both be realized. So I guess one way to look at Sartwell's argument then is that it's a dilemma for those who take justification to be constitutive of knowledge. On the one hand, if justification is merely instrumentally valuable, merely a means to achieving knowledge, then it would be incoherent to take this means of achieving the goal as constitutive of the goal. On the other hand, if justification is intrinsically valuable, and so we can say it's genuinely constitutive of knowledge, it's one of the final goals of inquiry, well, again, we face an incoherence. Knowledge involves two incompatible goals. Either way, knowledge becomes incoherent. Okay, how should we respond to this? Well, so Sartwell says that if knowledge gives us two goals which sometimes conflict, then knowledge is incoherent. As Scott Aiken argues, however, it's not clear why we should believe this. Aiken asks us to consider being a good sport. Being a good sport involves playing well, and it involves playing by the rules. Now, these will sometimes conflict. It may well be that playing well, in the sense of doing what it takes to win the game, would be best served by bending the rules. We have these two goals that sometimes are in tension with each other, but this doesn't seem to show that the notion of being a good sport is incoherent. What it shows is that being a good sport is hard, and that there may be cases where there are no good options. Sometimes circumstances conspire against you, and there's nothing you can do to be a good sport. It is hard to balance these goals. This is why being a good sport takes effort. And this is why it's a noteworthy achievement. The mere fact that a particular achievement involves two goals that sometimes come apart, that doesn't seem to show that our concept of the achievement is incoherent, or so Aiken argues. There is perhaps a broader concern about Sartwell's strategy here. Let's say we grant that taking justification to be constitutive of knowledge would render knowledge an incoherent notion. Well, this doesn't in itself show that justification is not constitutive of knowledge, because maybe knowledge is an incoherent notion. So compare, for instance, the ordinary concept of God, an omnipotent, omniscient, benevolent creator of the universe. This concept is of enormous importance to human society. Belief in God is central to many people's lives. It's been the subject of much philosophical debate, but it has been argued that this concept is incoherent. There are paradoxes of omnipotence, for instance, such as the paradox of the stone. Can an omnipotent being create a stone so heavy that it cannot lift it? Well, if yes, if it can create such a stone, then it can't lift the stone. So there's something it can't do, so it's not omnipotent. If no, then it can't create the stone. So there's something it can't do, so it's not omnipotent. Either way, there's something it can't do, so it can't be omnipotent. So omnipotence is logically impossible. It is incoherent. Now, of course, there are plenty of responses to that sort of argument, plenty of ways of avoiding that paradox. But the key point is just, it seems inappropriate to just take it for granted that ordinary language concepts like knowledge will turn out to be logically precise and perfectly well behaved. They're might be a great deal of incoherence in our ordinary language concepts. And so, with that in mind, we might think that Sartwell's second argument just misses the mark. The fact that the justification condition renders knowledge an incoherent concept does nothing to show that it's not part of that concept. Maybe all we've shown is that knowledge is an incoherent concept. Okay then, so those were Sartwell's arguments and some of the objections to them. That is all I wanted to talk about in this video, so thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.